I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to be looking at how Apple loops can actually inspire you or build a backing track over which you can then start producing your own ideas. So what we've got here is a completely blank arrangement. I've got one audio track set up, and onto that I'm going to place a first audio file. Now, I don't really know where I'm going to go with this. We're going to slightly see whether or not we can get inspired by Apple's loop content. And I want to start with some drums. So what I'm going to do is to select the instrument header here and select all drums. And actually, to be honest, this isn't really going to make my life any easier because you can see that there's a vast array of content. So I could spend some time just listening through a range of things, or I can actually limit my search a little bit, sort of on purpose. I've got a little search loops option here. And if I click the word, I don't know, funk, maybe, into there, what I can do is to narrow the search down to anything which has got funk in its title, and that makes life a little bit easier. I've still got a long list of things, but maybe hopefully here we can find something that feels like it might be a good place for us to start. So I'm going to just audition a few little things here. I'm going to start down here, vintage funk. That's a nice sound, but it's a little bit roomy. I want something a little bit tighter and a bit less reverberant. Let's try this instead. Okay, I really like this groove, so I'm going to import this onto my first audio track and put that here. Now, the only thing I would say is that it feels quite fast. You can see, particularly if we zoom in, we can see that this is a 2-bar loop, and that's fine. But we can also see that the host tempo of the project is at 120 beats per minute. I'm going to bring that down to maybe 110 and just see how that feels. Automatically, the loop won't change in length because it's an Apple loop. It's governed by the tempo of the project, so I can audition it at different speeds, and hopefully we'll find the right sort of tempo for this loop. Yeah, I like that a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that using the Alt key and simply copy it to bar 3. And then I'm going to set up a loop head around this area here simply by dragging over the top to create a 4-bar loop. And we've now got a sort of foundation for our groove. I'm just going to turn this down a little bit so we can hear subsequent loops coming in at a good volume. Now to this, I want to add something that's going to be a bit pitched and something which is going to maybe provide a nice sort of musical foundation for the track moving forward. So not drums this time. I'm going to click the little orange cross up here to deselect all of the choices that I've made so far. I'm going to look instead this time maybe at trying to find something a bit sort of funky along the electric piano sort of mark. Now, what you'll see within the Apple loops is that we've got blue tagged files and green ones. Now, green ones are MIDI files. If I drag that in onto a software instrument track, I'll actually get the MIDI data that is within that groove. So actually I can then import a loop and then have the option to change some of the notes if I want to. Whereas the blue loops are audio files and simply work in the same way that our drums do, in terms of the fact that they'll be fixed and they'll come in with a waveform display as we've seen already. Now what I want to do is to find something that just, I don't know, sits underneath this groove and feels like it's going to be a good sort of fit for it. Let's audition a few options. Okay, this feels like it's got some good energy in it. It's working really nicely with the groove. The other ones are a little bit mellow, a bit loungy. So let's take this one and simply drag it into here. And we can begin to see how quickly we can start building something that's got some vibe and something, again, which we might start thinking about lyrics or songwriting over the top. Let's just hear these two things together. That's working well. The piano's a bit loud and proud, so let's just turn that down as well. Okay, so we've got a bit more headroom in the track as well. We've got these two loops working nicely alongside them, alongside one another. So What next? What might we add to this just to provide some foundation to the track? Well, maybe something that's a little bit bassy. Now, at the moment, what we're doing is we're simply just dragging and dropping entire loops in, but every once in a while, you find a loop that feels like it's got something good about it, but maybe you don't want to use the entire thing. And there's a loop that I've used before, which I know works quite well, which I'm going to go and find right away here. So within the bass section, I'm going to just come and find bass instruments, which are here. And again, I've got an opportunity then to select synth basses or electric basses, but I don't have to do that because I know the name of the sound that I'm going for here. This time, I want to use this sound here, which is called yeah bass. Sounds like this by itself. Now, all these little fidgety bits in between the downbeats are the bits that I find quite interesting about this loop, not the sort of strange vocoded bit at the very beginning of the sound. So what I'm going to do is, again, import this loop onto this particular track. But what we want to do is to use the bits in the gaps. Now, what I really want to do here is to find a useful way of being able to chop up this individual region, so that I've got a new section starting on each downbeat so that I can then make them all shorter to get rid of that bit at the beginning of each bar that I don't like. There's a very useful key command for this. I'm going to press T to bring up the toolbar, and I'm then going to select the scissors tool. And what I want to do is to click at the beginning of bar 2. But if I do that whilst holding down the Alt button, what will actually happen is that I'll chop in bars. So when I let go, rather than simply chopping at bar 2, I've now chopped up each individual bar. And the reason why I've chopped at the bar was because the first chop that I made was a bar after the beginning of the region. I'll show you what I mean. If I hit Command and Z to go back a step, if this time we were to chop at beat 3 and I hold down the Alt button, this time we'll end up with chops every half bar because that's where I made the first chop. So that's a really useful key command. So I'm going to do that one last time. I've undone that step, this time Alt, and I'm going to click at the beginning of bar 2, and now we end up with 4 bars, each of which is chopped on the downbeat. Let's come back to the pointer tool. And what I'm going to do this time is to select all 4 of those regions, and I'm going to get rid of this first beat, which is where that little vocoded sound is. And hopefully what we'll get is all the little fidgety stuff in the gaps after that without that strong downbeat. And that's working really nicely. This little section here, right at the end of bar 2 and the end of bar 4 is particularly nice. I'm less sure about these bits here and here. So what I'm going to do is to select those 2, and I'm simply going to drag back a little bit to make those selections even smaller. And now we're getting the real punch of that electric piano. We're getting some nice spaces as well. Lots of the Apple content within the Apple loops is really busy, and it's got lots of stuff going on in every single beat. And sometimes it's really nice to strip them back and just find individual little bits that we can use. And actually the last sound that I think I've got in mind for a little inspiring backing track over which we could then start writing a new song might be similar. I want a sort of bass note that's just going to arrive on the downbeat of each bar. So I'm going to go looking for a bass loop, and I'm not necessarily listening for all of the detail that happens the whole way through that. I just want something which is going to be strong on the downbeats. So I'm going to stay within the bass folder because I want another bass loop. And again, I'm just going to audition a few choices here just to see if I can find something that feels like it might be a good sort of fit for the track. Let's come up and try some a little bit higher up within here. Let's just see what happens with a few of these. Okay, so this loop is a really interesting case in point. If you listen to the whole thing, you can hear that it goes out of tune and it feels busy and like there's much too much going on. But every 2 bars, there's one note happens that feels like it could be quite a good foundation for our track. Let's just import it and see if we can find that note. Let's put this in on this 4th track down here, and you can see how busy this loop is. We're just going to solo it and hear it all the way through. So it goes wandering off. All I really need is this very first note. So again, what I'm going to do is to grab the bottom right-hand corner and simply just drag back over this loop to get rid of all of the bits and pieces I don't need, just to leave us with one note. Again, in solo mode, it sounds like this. Okay, now we've got a little click on the end of this file, so let's see if we can zoom in on this and just get rid of that a little bit by maybe adjusting the endpoint a little bit. That's a little bit better, but what we still need to do is just to make sure that we're losing this click, which is all too apparent. Up here in the top left-hand corner, if I click this little arrow next to the More button, I get a greater set of parameters over which I can work, including this little fade out option. If I put a 15 millisecond fade out on the end of this note, I think we'll get rid of that click. Sure enough, we've got this nice, smooth little control. So using our editor up here on the left-hand side, we can apply this fade out of a few milliseconds, and now we've just got one note, which I think is going to be a nice way for each of the repeats of our track to sort of have featured on the downbeat. So what I'm going to do is to simply take this one note, and I'm going to copy it to the start of each bar. So we've now got one full funk groove playing the whole way through. We've got our electric piano groove, which is accompanying that really nicely. And then we've got these two other grooves, which are just adding a little bit of detail at specific points within the track. Now, the thing that's great about creating backing tracks like this is that if I now get my guitar out and start vamping a little idea over the top, or if I think of a lyrical idea, it could be that many hours from now, when this track's evolved a bit further on, I get rid of all of this content and replace it with brand new things of my own. This is simply a really interesting way to get started, to work through an idea. And sometimes when the juices aren't flowing and creatively things aren't happening quite as you'd like them to be, working with Apple loops, just having some fun, throwing some things together can be a really nice way of just getting started.